Hello and welcome to the Meditation Conversation. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and today I am joined by D. Neil Elliott. He is the author of a new book called A Higher Road. His is a story of transformation. He was a highly educated, sorry, it's cut off here. I'll be editing this.
No
Okay.
problem.
So he has a beautiful story of transformation. He is highly educated, had a successful career, an amazing family, but he found himself in a very dark place. And he found a process to revolutionize his perception and lift himself into a state of inner peace, joy, love, and abundance. And that is what he wants to bring to others. So I'm really excited to get to listen to his journey and to hear about his book and his concepts and steps of how we can all find ourselves in a more peaceful inner state. So welcome, Neil. What a joy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Kara. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I talked a little bit about your journey, but I would love to hear kind of how you found yourself where you are today and all of these concepts that have come to you.
Yeah. You want a short story or a long story?
Whatever you feel called to.
Well, let me give you context for everything, so it'll be a little longer than short.
Okay.
So born in 1960, currently 61, and I live in Canada. A professional engineer with an MBA, and worked in the corporate world for over 30 years. Three kids, five grandchildren. And so with this, concept, so engineer, you can immediately think of methodical, process oriented, mathematical, those kinds of things. And so my book explains all of this in detail, but essentially, I grew up. My father passed away when I was 5 years old. I'm the youngest of six. And so my mom, in 1965, six kids on her own, and had to go out and get a job immediately to be able to support the family. And so anyway, I adopted certain patterns of consciousness, behavior, thinking and feeling, and responses to life. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But essentially, in the 90s, so I'd be in my 30s, I wanted to change how I thought. I had, kind and considerate with everybody, and professional. But, I realized that I had, not as positive a thinking as I'd like to have. And so I picked up books that we all know about: Wayne Dyer, Napoleon Hill, Tony Robbins, Carolyn Myss, those kinds of things. And they all had great processes and stuff like that. And they all taught wonderful things. But I couldn't shift the way I fundamentally thought. We embed in our subconscious mind and program it really with tools that are of creation, tools of the ego. And we adopt those patterns. So when you try and change that stuff that's embedded in your subconscious mind, you're trying to do it consciously and you're using your willpower to do it. But in the end, your ego wins out because it's in there. It's like concrete. It's hard to break up. Now, I'm talking now from a new perspective, not what I thought about in the 90s.
Right.
So then I went into consulting in 2002, and it all became about work, pleasing clients. If you don't please clients, if you don't deliver, you don't get work. So, it all became about that. And I dropped all of the, reading, spiritual reading. In 2015, I realized that I had kind of found myself in this really deep, despondent depression. And so I picked up some new books issued by similar authors, Wayne Dyer being one of them, and, all new evolution of thinking and new concepts. But again, same process, still trying to follow their processes, change how I thought, couldn't make it happen. So I ended up deciding that, asking questions like, what's in life? Like, why are we here? Because I'm working hard. I'm doing all the things that I think need to be doing. I'm making a lot of money. I'm spending a lot of money, but I'm just totally miserable. And no one knows about it. We're all actors in our environment. We all can put forward what we want others to see. And so my family didn't know about it. My wife didn't know about it. Anyway, so I ended up sitting down at a kitchen table after our house sold and crafted a suicide note.
Oh, wow.
And so what had happened a week prior to that, and the way I describe this now is this information found me. I didn't really find it,
Mhm.
but I came across some information that promised to liberate me from my thinking. And so I thought, okay, being an engineer, I was planning this suicide, a few months out so I could make sure my wife was financially okay, get rid of all the crap that I accumulated over my life so she didn't have to deal with it, and say goodbye to family and friends without them knowing what I was going to do. But I decided that, okay, well, if I do that, I can't, that's it. I'm done. So what I'll do is I'll put that to aside, put that date aside, and I'll study this material. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, then I can go ahead with that act. And I woke up a year later, almost a year to the day later, and just full of inner love and peace and joy. And I felt totally abundant. Nothing changed in my environment. It's just how I thought about it and how I felt. And I just had a new verve for life. And that would have been a year after that. So it would have been late fall, December 2018. And since then, I've just carried on with this journey and the deepening and the knowledge and the understanding and the connection that I have with the source of our being, whether you want to call it God, Yahweh, Allah, the Tao, whatever you want to call it, is just stronger more and more insightful. And I'm learning and I'm just opening myself up, and new things are happening in my life. And I am not by in any means perfect. I still
Mhm.
have a lot of work to do. But what I wanted to do after that happened was, a year after I had these two meditations where a year after I started the process, I had these two meditations that I went into, and I went into, you shift in levels of consciousness to higher frequencies. And I was in this really high state of frequency of consciousness of in this meditative state, and I went into this period of just being enveloped in unconditional love. I didn't care what happened to my body. I didn't care what anybody had done to me in the past. Nothing mattered. The only thing I would felt unconditionally loved, and no matter what I did, I wasn't judged for. And then I was just at this total peace. I didn't want to leave that state. I could have just stayed there forever. And I had two of those back to back, a few days apart. And it's just been this just wonderful, amazing journey since then. And I wanted to share this with everybody I knew. And I thought, I'd like to share this from the rooftops. And I thought I'd be looked at like a nutcase. So so it took me a couple of years to figure out the best way to do this is to write a book
Mhm.
and share the reasons, share the mechanisms of how we create every event and every circumstance that comes into our lives through our thinking and feeling, and then share the foundational material that I read based in science that opened me up to a place where I could accept this new material that came to me. And then the last part of my book is my personal experience as I've followed the 7 steps that I offer for people to consider for themselves.
Mm.
So it's really it's a concrete process. You will gain new information and new knowledge. And if you're open to it, you can totally transform your life.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that and for the honesty and the vulnerability um, in your sharing. It's and there's a big gap. I feel like that I'd love to dive into from sitting at the table and drafting that note and planning, your suicide, to a year later recognizing that you're at a totally different platform. You're just living from a different level. So, and I know that this must be what the book is, it's the steps of like, how did you start to embody it? But you left some really, really enticing breadcrumbs there, as far as, one, how this material came to you, because you said it's not that you found it, it found you. It's more of how it manifested. And then two, just like the implementation of it, and that sort of thing. And I know we want to kind of walk the line between some of that you save for your readers, and I respect that. So whatever you feel called to share, but I would love to fill in some of those gaps there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me describe my book first, and
Okay.
then we can get into some of these things. So my book has 5 parts. So it's called A Higher Road: Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spiritually. And I offer people a 7-step process to inner peace, love, joy, abundance, and prosperity. And so the way I've structured my book is the first part is really just an overview of what you're going to learn, and kind of set up for me sitting at this table crafting the suicide note. The second part of my book is a memoir. And although I'm a very private person, I felt it was really important to be candid in that memoir so that people could understand how the patterns of thinking and feeling that I adopted um, created every experience and every event that came into my life. And so I outlined some specific things with events, and then the behaviors and stuff and the thinking that I adopted, and then the eventual manifestation of those events. And the third part of my book is based in science. So it's a chapter on consciousness, and it's the new way I look at consciousness from how I used to look at consciousness. And then I offer some scientific books that I read that, in retrospect, I now look back and go, these had all come to me to lay this foundation to open me up to understand what I was about to receive.
Mm.
And so I offer the exact same things to people to consider to read if they haven't read this kind of material before. I've constructed my book to try and get people to be as open as possible before I share this blueprint information. I call it blueprint information. And the reason I do that is because the blueprint information is presented in such a way that I normally would have run from it.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people would run from it and they wouldn't even consider it.
And why would that be? It's too dry, or
There's going to be all kinds of reasons for it. One is
okay.
it seems to have a really strong religious bent to it.
Oh, okay.
And I can tell you it's not,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems to, it appears to. And so
Mm-hmm.
you really need to approach this information with kind of a foundation. So through this science chapter, I build a foundation for a new understanding of consciousness and how our thinking and a feeling affects our biology, and how we are influenced by everything that happens around us, and we let our externalities drive our thinking and feeling based on things that we have adopted in the past, and how society is being influenced right now collectively through the memes that are just prolific on the internet, or through radio and TV and films and news. Anyway, so this on science. Then I introduce people to that chapter ends with an introduction that will stretch your understanding of consciousness to an even greater extent. And I do that through sharing a near-death experience of another author, and I recommend people read that author. And the fourth part of my book is I really share this blueprint information, which I've gathered all of this information together. I call it a blueprint document. And I offer it for people that read A Higher Road once they've read A Higher Road, if they want to go back and do the 7 steps. So, my recommended way to read A Higher Road is you pick it up, read it cover to cover, and don't forget to read all the introductory note to reader and stuff like that. Read it cover to cover, and then understand the process in its entirety, and then make a decision for yourself whether this information makes sense to you or not. And if it does, then go back and start with some of the science material, start directly with step 1, your choice. But at least then you have the context and you have the understanding of where I was and where I got to. The final part of my book is, as I mentioned earlier, my personal experience as I went through the 7 steps. So read it cover to cover, make a decision for yourself. If you decide, if this doesn't land with you, if you're, for whatever reason, then I ask, if you've picked up a hard copy cover of the book, paperback or hard copy, please just pass it on to somebody else without any colorful commentary, and let them discover for themselves whether it works for them or not. Mm-hmm. Because we can never accurately judge the inner reality of another person. Someone who's very affable and kind and considerate can be entirely misery internally. Mm-hmm. And we're all good actors in that way. So I just recommend that you pass it on to somebody else. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
Well, that's very Canadian of you. Thank you. After you. We can be like that in the Midwest here too. But anyway, so what I love so much about this, there are many things that you said that I love. One of those being that we're all on our own journeys, and there are different things that are going to resonate with different people. And so just because, like you say, it may not be that this particular book, it might find its way to somebody who it doesn't resonate with. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to resonate with somebody else. But what I love too with your story is just your whole background and your methodology. You have an engineering background, you have a very scientific approach, you're very practical, very grounded, and that is going to speak to a certain type of person where inherently there's already going to be a level of trust because it's so grounded. And it's not just like, okay, well, I feel like, my guides are telling me this, and I love that stuff too. Like, I totally love when people can tune into their guides and they're being directed that way. But there's a whole other group of people who that will not work with. It puts a wall up. And when we have people such as yourself who come from such a scientific, material world, worked for corporate life and really has a rootedness in science, that can really help bridge with certain people. And I am one of those people. Like, I also come from a corporate background. I was in the IT field for many, many years. And so I have that background and that foundation also. And so those are the types of things, especially in the beginning of my kind of awakening to understanding consciousness, understanding energy. Those were the types of things that really resonated with me, because it was like taking the material world and what I could understand with my 5 senses, and then just kind of helping me to experience more and more and kind of open up more and more. So it's really a really beneficial approach for so many people. So I really appreciate that.
Didn't want to move my chair there in the middle of that just because of noise.
I was like, did he mute himself? I didn't know if
No,
I
no.
couldn't
Oh,
hear.
that'd be a good idea. I could have done that and moved my chair. Um, so okay. Now, do you have a question that you want to
No,
pose,
that
or
was more of an observation. I do have
okay?
questions, but if anything was sparked through that, then
Oh,
you can
yes,
go for it.
absolutely. Yep. So, Kara, I'm like, this is what happened to me is that this bridge between spirituality and science. I personally needed something that initially could be observed, measured, and calculated.
Mhm.
And so let's talk about a little bit about consciousness and my new concept of consciousness. And this is how this science chapter kind of opens. Not really, but this is some of the stuff in it. Is I used to think that what I thought about was all in my brain. And the thoughts I had and stuff were things that I had either learned or been exposed to from childhood to adulthood, and then reinforced through things that I was exposed to. And of course, I was right, and others were wrong. I was this was
Obviously.
good, that was bad, that kind of
Me
stuff.
too. I'm always right too.
Yeah. So my concept of consciousness now is like consciousness is not only in our brain, it's in our body, and it's all around us. And I see thoughts not only generated in the mind or through the programming of the subconsciousness, but I see thoughts more like a stream that go by my awareness. And I'll pick a thought out of that stream. And if it's something that I like, I will keep it. And what I mean by like is something that's consistent with the way I think. So it might be a denigrating thought, or it could be a loving thought. So I pick that out. I take it. I go, oh, I like that one. I'll keep it, and I'll mull on it and dwell on it, and I'll reinforce what I already am thinking. If it's a thought I don't like, I just throw it back in the stream, and away it goes. Now, my concept of consciousness is even beyond that now. But the first thing I had to actually understand, and there's an author that I share with people that helped me do this, was that everything that we think is right or wrong, good or bad, true or false, is just a belief. Mm-hmm. End of story. It's just a belief. But in order to change those beliefs, you need to actually be able to change things that you have programmed in your subconscious. So then you need a process to do that. So I needed a process that was going to change how I thought. And in order to do that, you need to be able to do certain things. And that's what this book is about. That's what I lay out for people. But the next thing that I read that I share with people again in A Higher Road is a book that it described, and it's all based in science and grounded with research, is that what you think about affects the expression of a cell. So you can either have healthy thoughts that promote the well-being of a cell, or if they are not healthy thoughts, they can cause illness in the cell. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I'd talk about that's what you're manifesting. And then I read some books, and I share a couple on neuroplasticity. So it used to be that science believed that the brain was, after you've grown, it was at a fixed size, and then it atrophied over time. In the 1960s, they discovered that the brain actually, you can rewire your neural pathways, how you think, and you can build new brain cells. So I didn't know you could build new brain cells. I was still under the impression, it atrophied over time. Mm-hmm. And even though Tony Robbins' book is all about neural pathways, but Awakening the Giant Within, I think that one was called. That was back in the 90s. And that's all from memory, so I might have the title wrong. But then I read this author that had this near-death experience. So what's happening is I'm building this foundation of everything is just a belief. Oh, what we think about affects our biology, and we can rewire how we think. Then I read a book about a near-death experience, about a woman who had suffered from an aggressive form of cancer over a 4-year period. She got down to the point where she was somewhere between 75 and 90 pounds. She couldn't lift her own head. She's on oxygen 24 hours a day and under constant care. She fell into a coma. They rushed her to the hospital, and the admitting physicians told her husband and family she wouldn't make it through the night. 24 hours later, she woke up and she declared she was going to be totally fine. And within 2 weeks, they couldn't find a trace of cancer in her body.
Wow.
All of that, again, medically documented. Now, they can't explain it, but it's all medically documented. And the important part of her book, her whole story is good, but the important part of her book is what she described in that 24-hour period. Some of the things that she described were messages she brought back, so to speak, was that, we come from love, we return to love. We're not judged after death, no matter what we do. And that she felt like she was becoming, she said, we're unified after we die, we're all one. And another message was that she felt like she was becoming, every time she got tied to what was happening in this material plane, she felt herself expanding and becoming a part of everything. And she met her father, who passed away 10 years earlier, and communicated with him. And she said that communication was entirely different. It's like she became him. And so what he thought, she thought, and she could understand him through that mechanism of communication. I could not understand it, but it was believable. And so I read that book. Then this blueprint document showed up. Then I crafted the suicide note, because her book, my interpretation for me at the time was her book gave me the green light to commit suicide because I wouldn't be judged after death. I had this nagging Christian doubt, even though I'm agnostic, I had this nagging Christian doubt at the time that if I do something bad or commit suicide, that's it. I'm going to hell. So her light gave me that, her book gave me that green light to do that. But what really was happening, where all of this books was laying this foundation for me to understand this new information, be open to and curious about, without prejudgment, this information I was going to receive. And when you read this information, if you decide to pick up a higher road, go through it, and then get this information from me after you've decided to embark on this process, you need to come to this blueprint material exactly as I've described. Curious, open, non-judgmental. And as you go through it, you have to not doubt. Doubt creates consciousness barriers that will prevent your learning and will eradicate learning that you've already received. So you have to keep that in abeyance as you go through this material. So if you come across something that you're kind of like, just, use it, positive affirmations, don't think about it. The point thing is, don't dwell on it. Dwell on the things that ring true for you, that you can understand.
Yeah.
And this material does this final bridge between spirituality and science. For example, what do we know in science today that we didn't know 100 years ago, 200 years ago? So I'll give you an example of things. Let's talk about cells. So, we know that, back up a bit. First, we know that there's nothing solid under the sun. Everything is just energy. At a subatomic level, we now know through materialistic science that everything is just energy. So electrical particles science believes Big Bang, out of that came electromagnetism, out of that came everything that we see in the universe. Electrical particles randomly got together, fused, and formed elements. Those elements randomly got together and formed the first living molecule. Those living molecules randomly got together and formed the first cell. And then here we have creation after billions of years, what we see that's alive. And in science, we know that, the cell fertilizes the ovum. You have one cell that divides into two, that divides into four, etc. And you get this intricate building of the construction of the body over a 9-month period. We also know in science that every cell in the body has the library of information for the entire body. In addition, we know that when cells are building a liver, they work harmoniously together to build and then maintain that liver and everything else in the body. And so the question becomes, well, when did consciousness first creep into living material? Is there consciousness in a cell? Or is it just in the brain, as materialistic science thinks it's about? We think with electrical impulses in our brain, and we feel with magnetic impulses in our nervous system. So when you look at a cell, let's look at one cell, and it has a permeable membrane on it. And through that permeable membrane, the cell just discerns that this is nutrition that's going to be good for me, and it absorbs it into the membrane. It discerns that now I have a buildup of toxic waste, and I need to get rid of that toxic waste. Otherwise, it will affect my health. This is the first act of consciousness that we could, in science, go, yeah, that's consciousness. It's purposeful.
Intelligence, yeah.
Yes, it's purposeful, right? So then you say, and these cells in our body work together harmoniously. So they never intrude on each other's work. When they're building a liver, they don't suddenly spring into making an ear. Mm-hmm. And, they maintain all of that. So there's this whole harmony in our bodies with our cells that we don't display at all as humans when we're jointly working on a project. Yet that's all within us, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you look at one cell and you go, okay, well, yeah, I think, as a scientist, you go, yeah, there's consciousness in a cell. So then the question becomes, well, if there's consciousness in a cell, why not in the living molecules that first got together to form the cell? It's a logical step. Mm-hmm. And if in the living molecules, why not in the elements that got together to form a living cell? And if in the elements, why not in the electrical particles that fuse together to form elements? Mm-hmm. You can't escape this kind of logical process without at least saying, yeah, there could be consciousness in all of that. Mm-hmm. We, in effect, we believe that, and science believes, and most people believe that we are matter imbued with consciousness. And in reality, we are consciousness made visible through the descent of vibrational frequency of electrical particles. And so then the question becomes, well, science talks about, for instance, there was a big bang. They don't know of what, and they don't know why, and they don't know. All they really know is afterwards we have the universe, and we have the development of stars, and we have living things. And this material will describe exactly what was before the Big Bang, the impetus for the Big Bang, what came out of the Big Bang, and why electromagnetism is in existence, and the fact that we use the tools of creativity, electromagnetism, and how we use them and why we use them for our soul to learn the lessons it needs to learn as it carries on its lifetime in this lifetime. So our souls, over many incarnations, they come here to learn lessons in this school we called Earth. All of this is described. And it's done in such a way that will build new knowledge for the reader and new understanding of creation. And then if you study this material, what happens is you will get illumination, shafts of new insight of information that will come to you in meditation or when you're not thinking about something else. And it'll be some new truth that you understand that finally comes to you. And the process that I went through requires meditation. And you will learn a meditation that enables you to go through this process and through the steps required to enable you to connect with the divine. So I picked up the meditation in the 90s and I did it, and I tried the 100 different types of meditations. And there's all good reasons why you meditate, and everybody has their reasons why they meditate. But I never, from my perspective, understood the true purpose of meditation. And I can tell you today that the true purpose of meditation, my understanding, my belief, it is for you to be able to connect with the source of our being. And when you go through a process to connect with the source of your being, you will feel the inflow of spiritual energy, not only into your head, but through your entire body. And you will start this whole process of, if you understand what steps to take and how to go about it, you will start this process of cleansing your consciousness and then rebuilding it. And this is the process required in order to totally transform your life. And when you do, I tell you, you will never look back.
Yeah.
Your life entirely changes.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. That's beautiful. Thank you for taking us through that. And a couple of things that you mentioned really struck me. One being the non-locality of consciousness. You know, you started that by talking about how we're used to understanding that our thoughts are coming from our brain, and that we actually are storing our thoughts and our memories and our feelings also in the body, um, and it's non-local. And it's just funny that you mentioned this, because this is the third time in 2022 on this podcast that this has come up in different forms. So you have a much more scientific bent. I talked about it in an episode with somebody named Demetria, and then again with somebody named Teresa. So if listeners are interested in that particular topic, you may want to check those out too, because they're different slants and different kind of points of the same concept. And I love when I keep getting this reinforcement from different directions in my own life that reaffirm this point. So I love, and I want to highlight that has come up 3 times in this forum, in case other people are intrigued by that. But and I shared with Demetria too, like my own version of experiencing that in a sort of mystical experience, where I was actually recognizing that I was holding different memories and different even people and relationships in certain parts of my body, and I could see what it was stored next to, and really fascinating kind of things. And it brings to mind this concept also that that you can almost shift, where you can shift how you see the brain or even your whole being as a filter. And this is what you were saying, but I'm just tweaking the words a little bit with how it was so powerful for me a few years ago to, I think I read it in a book, and it was written by a doctor or something. So again, it had like this spiritual or this scientific slant to it, but it was like the research that they had done was suggesting that the brain was more of a filter rather than creating. It's this way that we're interpreting consciousness, you know, and how we're like filtering consciousness and intelligence through the brain and through our being, rather than, and we're filtering thought and everything through our being, rather than it being created in there. And so what you were saying kind of reinforced that as well, which is really beautiful.
Yeah. And so, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please.
And so let me describe something a little bit more so that you can, have a different perspective of perhaps this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So so the brain develops at about age 5, where it starts to make discernment and conscious choices. When we come in as babies, if we've been fortunate enough to be born into a family of means that love us, can care for us and feed us, we're this little embodiment of joy. And what we are we're sponges. We learn from our parents. We feel their feelings, and this starts to shape, kind of our childhood, and reinforces or adds to what we've come into from a past life that we need to learn through this process of evolution of the soul. And when we get to 5, we start to make our own conscious choices and stuff. We're still being influenced by everything we're educated and learn and all our family and friends. And as we grow from babyhood to adulthood, we think we're becoming versed in the ways of the world. But what we're really doing is we're binding down our soul in our ego and shutting our connection off, our soul's connection to the divine. So I'll call it the divine, could be called God, could be called source of light. Doesn't, at this point, it doesn't matter in this conversation. So we shut it off. We shut it off from the connection to source. The behaviors and patterns that we develop in terms of our thinking, the ego is a tool of creativity in order to attract to us experiences in our lives so that we learn the lessons that it needs to learn. And it does that through how we think and what we feel. So when we think, it's an electrical impulse in the brain that is a consciousness plan, whether it's something that we like or we don't like. It's a consciousness plan that we create a blueprint out of. And then what we do is we magnetize that plan. The more we think about it, dwell on it, and feel on it, whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, it doesn't matter. The universe is indiscriminate when it comes to magnetic pull. And so what we do is when that plan has, over a period of time, be it a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 20 years in the future, 50 years in the future, you will start to attract like experiences into your life. And your ego only has 2 ways to operate in the world. And it's through this ephemeral electromagnetic bonding rejection process. It bonds with everything it likes. I like chocolate cake. I like that person. I like that car. I like that event. And it rejects things that it doesn't like. I don't like that person. Don't like that food. Don't want to go to that concert. Those kinds of things. Those are the only mechanisms that the ego has to create the experiences in our life. So we decide we want a new car. Oh, I want a new car and I really want that car. So we go out, we earn money, we get a new car, and we're really happy because, we just got the car that we wanted. And so we're really joyful. And then what happens is that possession becomes dull and boring and mundane, and this whole euphoria starts to wear off. And so then what we do is we go out and we show this car off to our friends. Oh, see the new car I got and everything. And that gives us a little boost, little ego boost there. We feel good about it. But over time, that just wears off. And so then what we do is we set another goal. And our soul is always trying to return to the unconditional love from which it came. But the only way the ego has to do this is through through this electromagnetic process of bonding rejection. And so life becomes this endless chase for goals to try and create this happiness in our life. But depending what we're doing and depending what we're creating, and if they are selfish, egotistical activities that we think about all the time and that we want, they will create that same kind of events and experiences in your life. So in a higher road, I unknowingly, unwittingly, and ignorantly, because I didn't know this is what I was doing. So in 2011, I think it was, I described exactly what I did every day for a year that eventually manifested a brand new $60,000 hardtop Lexus convertible. I thought, oh, I was just lucky, like this came into my life. And later in the book, after people understand some of these mechanics and mechanisms, I describe exactly what happens and why that Lexus came into my life. And again, it was something for me I can now look back and go, that was something for me that I needed to experience at the time so that I could actually put that example in this book to describe to people. And this is exactly what we do that creates every event and every experience in our life. we need to change our frame of reference from, you are not here to experience unconditional joy and happiness in life. That would prevent the soul from being able to move forward in its evolution through many lifetimes.
Right. You get too
And
comfortable and you're
well,
not gonna take those steps.
it's only through lessons of suffering does the journeying soul gain self-knowledge to discard the ego and retain individuality after it leaves this world. So your eventual goal. So if we take off this framework of or frame of reference of a lifetime, and you look at this of your soul has many incarnations through varying genders, varying places of origin, varying colors of skin, religion, culture and languages, you can start to see your soul as having this evolutionary process to be able to gain this self-knowledge, to be able to step into the light. And when you leave that lifetime after you have completed all of these lessons that you need to learn, then you will be able to step into the light and you will not need to be reincarnated again. And when I started this process, after about 7 months of doing this process, I started to feel this little tingling at the top of my head. It was about the size of a dime, and I didn't know what it was. That kept growing. And eventually I realized that, what I'm doing is I'm impressing new brain cells with new knowledge at the top of my head, and that is operating at a higher frequency, which enables me to connect with the divine. Today, that opening, you could stick a bowl over my head that goes down halfway over my ears, and that opening is the top entire of my head.
Mm-hmm. Does it
I
sometimes feel like the air conditioning's going right through it? I call it air conditioner crown sometimes. It's like it feels very cool in there.
yeah, yeah. So I describe some of these things in the book
Mm-hmm.
when I'm going through in that final chapter. But what that enables me to do is I experience, constant and mutual reciprocation and communication between myself and the source of our being, or um, other souls that are here to help me. And life is not a journey without. Life is really a journey within. And until we wake up to the fact of what we're doing to ourselves through these mechanisms, we will continue to do it to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, I look at my life now and I'm all the things I did, which, I considered people did as, horrible to me or, been treated badly. I no longer look at it that way. These are all things that are expressions of the ego. When I look at a person today, I see a soul that's in them that's equal to mine, that is unconditional love. And that anything that they may be doing, which I might consider to be reprehensible, which I no longer judge. I just recognize that's what's going on. It is really just the expression of their ego, and it's their journey to the light. So I no longer judge. I just see everybody as this soul that's on a journey I'm here through whatever experience. I'm here to help as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And I want to reiterate too another point that you had early on when you were talking about ways that you suggest that people take the material in your book, and you talked about the doubt, and that goes so parallel with non-judgment, withholding doubt. And you mentioned about how it kind of shuts us down, and it like retracts our the knowledge that we already have had in the past, but it also retracts our energy. It contracts our energy. And it's such an important point, even within a meditation practice, where it's like you actually can experience and feel these visceral things because you're picking up these like subtle sensations, But how quickly can we shut those down and be like, oh, it's just my mind, or oh, I want it to be like that, so I don't. So so that's why I felt that way, because I made it up or whatever. And it's this like continuous unfoldment and this stepping out to say, to say yes, and just to still have discernment, but to give ourselves the chance to really step in to a higher road, a higher level of learning, a deeper awareness, greater wisdom. Because the more that we give in to doubt of the unfamiliar, the longer it takes, and the more we just close ourselves up. So I love that. And it goes so beautifully with the neutrality that you're talking about, where it's like, that judgment of continuing to like try to label, this is good, this is bad. And it's just more of an openness of what is. And in that neutrality, that's where we can find that balance and that openness. And literally that, what you talk about with the crown and that feeling, like you have to be in a centered state. And if you're, in judgment and disbelief and all of that is going to block that type of thing from happening. So it's just a beautiful weaving of the whole conversation of some really deep truths that through my experience and my understanding as well, just tapping into some really deep and pertinent truth that everybody can benefit from. That's what I meant to say.
Absolutely. And this self-analysis and self-criticism and like you said, trying to put a label on things, or self-rationalization of why you felt what you felt, you have to keep that in abeyance.
Yeah.
And know that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But as that energy, like it initially started flowing into my head, and then eventually it would flow down one side of my body and up the other. And then it might be in my solar plexus, or it might be in my chest. Now it, typically is in my head and in my chest and my solar plexus simultaneously, but I can still move it. And I'm at a point now where I can direct where I want healing energy in my body. And, you will, you will learn so much when you open yourself up and when you do this. But you need to be able to, when you meditate, you need to be able to get in this place of silence and stillness. Mm-hmm. So universal consciousness split into divine consciousness. Universal consciousness is in stillness and silence and equilibrium of these opposing twin impulses. And when it split into divine consciousness, it did that because it wanted to experience itself. And in order to experience itself, it created the tool of electromagnetism and the ego. And divine consciousness is in a state of silence and stillness and equilibrium, but it's always in a state of, or it's also in a state of activity through the forces of electromagnetism. Mm-hmm. And, when you can actually grasp all the concepts here, which are described if you go through the 7 steps, you will understand these concepts in a new way. And what you initially learn, in your first month, 2 months, year of looking at this material and understanding this material, I know from my experience that what I read 4 years ago and thought I understood, I have a much different understanding of it today.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
And it's not that it has changed, but I have evolved in my understanding. Yeah. And when you actually feel this inflow of energy and you feel the power, the life force energy and the power that comes into you, and you get these moments of insight and inspiration, you will know that what you know is true. And
Yes.
when that happens, your faith is unshakable. Doesn't matter what anybody says to me these
Well,
days.
because it's not, it starts to be more than belief. It's experience. It's a truth that,
It,
yeah, I mean, you
it,
talk about near death experiences. That's one of my favorite things about those is that you can have, uh, you have people who have been entrenched in dogma of religion and then have a near death experience and that completely washes away and they know this new truth and it's unshakable and it
mhm,
doesn't line up with the doctrine that they have accepted their whole life. you know
yeah,
because it's experience. It's like you can't take that away from me. You can't shake me of that. I know what I know, and I know the truth of it, and it doesn't matter what somebody else tells me. um and it's just, and we don't need necessarily a near death experience to be able to get to a level of inner knowing as well. So I so appreciate what you're doing in really giving this grounded and practical, um, these methods to help people to open themselves up more and more to that which is within them. It's so important, and it's a beautiful, beautiful blessing. So thank you so much. How can people find out more about you, Neil, and where they can get your book?
yeah. So the book again is A Higher Road: Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spiritually. A 7-step process to inner peace, joy, love, abundance, and prosperity. My website, or the author name is D. Neil Elliott. The D is just first initial to differentiate me as an author and on the internet. The website is dneilelliott.com. So it's DNEILELLIOTT.com. The book's available on Amazon in hardcover, trade paperback, or ebook. It's available in all your favorite ebook forms, Kindle app, Nook, Kobo, and it's also available in bookstores globally.
Wonderful. Well, what a blessing to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kara. It's been a pleasure having a conversation with you.
Thank you. Okay.